Hello everybody and welcome to the 14th video in our series of videos on peace and war in Europe between 1920 and 1945. Today we will be looking at the fall of Mussolini and the D-Day landings. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes, so by the end of this presentation you guys should know how Mussolini was overthrown. You guys should know 4 details about the D-Day landings. And finally you guys should know the key terms: Mulberry Piers, the PLUTO pipeline, and what the Atlantic Wall was. As we saw when we were looking at the North Africa campaign on the 13th of May 1943, the Axis powers, Italy and Germany, evacuated North Africa. They were defeated at Al Alamein here, pushed back up to Tunis, and in 1943 they evacuated North Africa. This then led to the invasion of Sicily on the 10th of July 1943 with the invasion of Sicily. 160,000 Allied troops invaded Sicily, which is an island right at the tip of Italy. They landed on 5 points of attack. 3 from the British, 3 from the US Army, 2 from the British Army. The German initially, Italy were quite poor in their defence of the island. German forces, however, put up some resistance, but by mid-August the Allies had taken the entire island. While this was going on the 25th of July 1943, Mussolini was fired by King Emmanuel II, and he was arrested after Italy's embarrassing defeats in World War II. This then led to the Allied invasion of mainland Italy on the 3rd of September 1943. The Prime Minister who took over from Mussolini had negotiated a secret agreement with the Allies that he would turn on the German forces and surrender to the Allies. The forces landed in Italy on the 3rd of September in Reggio in southern Italy. However, Germany were aware of what was going to happen, and they took over most of Italy. As you can see here from the map on the bottom, the colours in light kind of brown show what the Allies took, and then the German forces took the north of Italy. On the 12th of September, the GRAN SASSO raid, the German forces actually rescued Mussolini from prison, and they installed him as leader of a puppet government in northern Italy. Now, he wasn't given any real power. He was just there as a figurehead, and the Germans really controlled that northern half of Italy. However, they were unable to stop the attacks that were coming from the Allies. So in June of 1944, the Allies actually took Rome and continued to push north. On the 28th of April 1945, Mussolini tried to flee. He was captured on his way to Switzerland, and he was brutally executed by the people of Italy. So that brings us to the end of Mussolini and Italy's involvement in the war. The next thing we're going to look at is Operation Overlord. So this was the planned invasion to open a second front against Germany. The Soviet Union had been looking for a second front to be opened for a long time, and finally in 1944 the British and United States and Canadians were in a position to actually open up a front. The Germans expected an attack here at Calais. As you can see, that is the closest point to Britain, but actually they had planned the invasion for down here in the Normandy beaches. One of the big things that they had to deal with was this thing called the Atlantic Wall. So this was German defences all along the coast. It goes all the way from Norway down past Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium and France. And all along there are army divisions, there are artillery batteries, and there is defences all along the coastline. However, on the 6th of June 1944, led by General Eisenhower, D-Day, or Deliverance Day as it was known, began. Planes that bombed German defences along the Atlantic Wall, and 23,000 paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines after midnight. These were also helped by French resistance fighters who bombed telecommunication lines and railway lines to help the Allied efforts. However, the main part of the operation was the landing of 156,000 Allied troops on 5 beaches in Normandy. All the beaches were given code names. The first one was Gold, in which 25,000 British soldiers landed. Juno was another one where 21,000 Canadian soldiers landed. Sword was another beach our code in for beach were over 28,000 British and French soldiers landed. Utah was a name where the American soldiers landed, and Omaha was the biggest landing where 34,000 soldiers landed. On the day itself, the first day of fighting, 4,000 Allied troops were killed taking the beaches. Warships and planes bombarded these things that you can see in the picture, pillboxes, which would have contained gun batteries and machine guns, used as defences for the Germans. They also would have bombed barbed wire fences so that soldiers could get through. Like I said, 4,000 Allied troops were killed taking the beaches, but they did establish beachheads so that more troops could land on the 5 beaches. Once the beaches were secured, Mulberry Piers were brought in. So these were artificial harbours, so that tanks and trucks could land on the beaches. And normally they were lined up side by side so that a truck or a tank could be driven off of a big boat and onto one of the beaches, and they could transport all of their equipment over onto the mainland of Europe. So what were the results then of the D-Day landings? Well, by the 12th of June 1944, for 6 days later, the Allies had actually united all the beaches. So all 5 beaches, they had control over the 5 beaches. It's estimated that about 10,000 Allied soldiers were killed in securing these beaches, and Germany lost about 10,000 soldiers as well, with 50,000 being taken captive. The Allies also set up the PLUTO pipeline. So these pipelines were built underneath the sea, as you can see here, and they would have been brought to transport oil that would have been needed in England over to the mainland in Europe so that they could continue their attacks on Germany. Finally, the liberation of France was secured thanks to the Normandy landings. So on the 15th of August 1944, troops actually landed in the south of France. As you can see here is coloured in dark blue, and by the 25th of August, 10 days later, Paris itself was liberated. That brings us to the end of our presentation. So by now you guys should know how Mussolini was overthrown. Second, you guys should know 4 details about the D-Day landings. And finally, you guys should know the Mulberry Piers, PLUTO pipelines, and the Atlantic Wall are. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something good from this video.